Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to Berea on a day that is not what anybody hoped for. That's probably the best way to describe what's going on here with the Cleveland Browns. Deshaun Watson is done for the season. It's an injury unrelated to his previous shoulder injury, and it is certainly casting an otherwise dark cloud over Berea right now. Not necessarily inside the locker room, I'll be clear about that, but you can kind of sense the disappointment and the frustration with the Browns knowing they've got yet another piece of adversity that they've got to deal with throughout the rest of the season. And Spence, this stinks. This flat out stinks. It doesn't mean the season's over. The team's 6-3, and they are certainly still in the thick of a playoff race. The report that we're hearing, although it's unconfirmed from the team, is that Dorian Thompson-Robinson is going to be the starting quarterback on Sunday against the Pittsburgh Steelers, not P.J. Walker. So we'll see how the week progresses, but that's what we're hearing. In the meantime, what can you say? I mean, this has just been kind of the story of the year for the Browns.
Yeah, it's certainly been an injury-riddled season dating back to just week one. Jack Conklin goes down, you lose Nick Chubb in week two. And, at the time, the Nick Chubb injury felt like the one that was going to be the devastating blow to the season. Just what he means to this team, face of the franchise in a lot of ways. The fan base obviously adores Nick Chubb. Given the Deshaun Watson accusations, I think he was kind of always a rallying cry for people like, well, that's still a guy I can root for on this team, which that's, it is what it is for some fans. But they've survived everything to this point. They've dealt with injury after injury. This one feels like, you're right, like a devastating blow. And I understand, like, you're in the locker room today. The players aren't going to give off that vibe. They're going to just keep saying, we're going to keep fighting. That's their job. It's no rest for the weary in the NFL. You go back out, you got a game next week against the Steelers. That's a pretty big one. So they're going to keep playing. That's all they can do. But from the outside looking in, man, like, how do you not feel like this is a devastating blow, especially on the heels of that win on Sunday, which we've been talking about being maybe one of the top 5 wins in franchise history since the team returned in 99. And then this bomb sort of drops on you on Wednesday. It's got to be devastating for the fan base. And on some level, the organization too, even if they're not going to say it publicly.
No, actually, I think Andrew Berry, who spoke earlier today, and as we shoot this, Kevin Stefanski has not yet addressed the media before practice. I actually think the organization is projecting optimism. And, I admire them for that. The season's not over, guys. Like, yeah, we lost our starting quarterback, and that sucks. Like, that's kind of the message. But, it's next man up. And as Anthony Walker said in the locker room, it's like, look, we're professionals. We'll figure it out. Like, the job is to go out and play football and to win. And in this division in particular, and he said, as you get into December and January, you got to play defense and you got to be able to run the ball. And he said, that's 2 things we feel like we can do at a high level. So the reality is, I think the Browns have a Super Bowl caliber defense, and they have been able to figure it out enough offensively. The reality is tough. You lose your star running back, you lose not just your 2 starting offensive tackles, but I don't know when DeJuan Jones will be back. Maybe this week. Who knows? You've taken a lot of blows here on the offensive side of the ball. And yet Kevin Stefanski is creative and has found ways to win games with guys that you would normally say aren't your starters. So I think the team is probably feeling like they got sucker punched here. But after having spent the last 25 minutes in the locker room, I can promise you that, they don't feel like their season is over. That's for sure.
Yeah, you bring up Kevin Stefanski. I think it's a good point. Like this 8-game stretch, like the previous 4-week stretch or 4-game stretch, I should say, 5 weeks, 4 games, where you didn't have Deshaun Watson with the other shoulder injury, I think tested his resilience as a head coach and his creativity. And he kept the guys afloat. He kept his team afloat. That's going to be tested down the stretch of the season. I think we'll learn a lot about him. And I think that is how you're going to have to win games, is just being creative offensively and finding ways to get the job done and score and put up enough points to win week in and week out. Almost in the ilk of, ironically, the team that you're playing this week, right? Like, their offense has been pretty miserable, and they just find ways to win games. Whether you want to say it's Mike Tomlin or whatever, it's the effect of the head coach. Kevin Stefanski's got to sort of bring a similar sort of feel to the table here too. But yeah, it is just wild, the number of injuries they've had to deal with, a lot more than maybe most teams in the NFL. And I I wonder. I know the team's not going to look back, but I think like between you and me and fans on the outside looking in, you got to wonder where this team would be if they had just held on to Josh Dobbs at the end of the preseason, and what that would mean for this team in terms of what that first stretch without Deshaun looked like and what this upcoming stretch without him was going to look like. Or on the other side of that, if they had made a deal at the deadline, which I think, honestly, Brendan, what's more egregious to me, and I want to be clear here because there's a lot of stuff being thrown out there on social media about like fire Andrew Berry and all this. I don't think trading a backup quarterback is warranting firing Andrew Berry, especially when you look at what he's brought to the table this year with the team. I mean, this team is really, really loaded, and they're 6-3 right now. Like I can't knock him for I can knock him for the trade, but I can't say it's fireable. But I think what's maybe even more egregious is that they didn't then try to make a move for a quarterback at the deadline, because they saw firsthand what this thing would look like without Deshaun. And ultimately, they had that context of that, and they still didn't do it. But again, hindsight's always 20/20.
I don't know. I just don't know if I totally agree with that. I think that's an easy thing to say, and I understand it. I think two things can be true at the same time. Josh Dobbs has been magical this year, both in Arizona and certainly now what he's done in Minnesota, while also being true that Deshaun Watson's shoulder injury with the rotator cuff, we understand, is unrelated to the fractured shoulder that he's now suffered. It just happens to be in a similar place, but the two injuries are supposedly not connected. And so if you felt like Deshaun was going to be healthy, and by the way, even if it looked clunky, you won games without him with PJ Walker at quarterback. I also don't want to pretend to know that Andrew Berry didn't try ever to go get another quarterback at the deadline. Maybe they tried, but they didn't have the capital, the draft capital or the other assets that they wanted to part with, and they feel good about the room that they've got. So I am not going to knock Andrew Berry for that at all. If they would have lost every game without Deshaun on the field, even with subpar quarterback play, maybe I would have a different opinion on that. But ultimately, I think it's okay where they're at. And while, yes, it is true that this team is going to add another quarterback at some point here in the near future, I don't know that they're going to add somebody that they're going to suddenly insert right into the starting lineup either. They want three quarterbacks on the roster. Does Matt Ryan come out of the broadcast booth? I don't know. Does Carson Wentz come to Cleveland as a free agent? Or do you just have another guy that you want to plug in as a practice squad guy?
Well, I was going to say Wentz got picked up.
Oh, did he get picked up? Okay.
He got where did he go last week? I can't remember off the top of my head. Somebody scooped him up last week. But yeah, like to your point, it's slim pickings is the kind of the bottom line here. In terms of what you're going to get on the veteran quarterback market, the free agency market, it's either pulling a guy out of retirement or scouring some team's practice squad or free agency of what's left and trying to insert them. But you're right; they're going to have to put this thing together with rubber bands and paper clips. I look back a little bit. Maybe you feel a little bit regrettable about the move that was made with Dobbs or what moves weren't made at the deadline. But all they can do at this point is move forward, which, as you said, is the sort of the vibe within the locker room. And I think that's probably the right mentality they have to have. And we're just going to have to see what they can kind of do from here, whether it's Dorian Thompson-Robinson, whether it's PJ Walker, or whether it's some veteran that they bring in. They got to hope their defense obviously kind of carries them, which it has done for most of the season anyway. And if they can do enough on offense, again, that creativity from Kevin Stefanski will be huge, then maybe they can still make some noise and salvage what's left of this season. But obviously a devastating blow. So much like Brendan, I'll tell you this just for context for those watching. I've gotten in the habit of taking my laptop with me in the car when I'm just running out to do random things, just in case some news breaks. When I was dropping my son off at daycare this morning, I had no anticipation that anything was happening. I was like, no, we're going to be good. It's just going to be a normal Wednesday, big win on Sunday. Deshaun's good. There's no more of this injury stuff we're worried about. And then all of a sudden, this thing gets dropped as I'm in the car, and I had to pull over and write the whole story I was writing on my phone. So that gives you some context as to how surprising I think it was for everybody, and maybe even to the Browns organization to an extent. But we'll see if they can weather the storm from here. They've obviously done it to this point.
Yeah, they don't have a choice. They got to figure out a way to get through it. That's for sure. So, with all the latest news and info on the Cleveland Browns, we've got you covered over at BrownsDigest.com. Certainly would appreciate it if you'd subscribe to our YouTube channel here. We'd like to bring you video content just like this, in addition to all of the press conferences with players and coaches along the way. We'll have some sound and some video for you coming up from the locker room here in just a bit on the channel. And Kevin Stefanski will talk at 1 o'clock. So we'll have that for you as well. For Spencer German, I'm Brendan Gulick. Again, we'll see you soon. BrownsDigest.com.